At the company gala, the boss asked my wife to dance and kissed her in front of everyone, as if I didn't exist. The room erupted in applause and glasses, but inside me, everything stopped. I left without a word, ending not only the night, but our marriage. And I remember the feeling with cruel precision. It was as if the air around me had evaporated, as if the sound of applause was on another plane of reality, distant, muffled, while the impact of her gesture pierced my chest. The world didn't collapse with a crash. It collapsed in silence. And that kind of silence hurts more than any scream. There was no possible preparation for that moment. No manual on how to act when the woman you love, the one you trust, decides to kill your story in public, before knowing eyes and empty laughter. No one warned you that betrayal can come disguised as a dance, a wide smile, a kiss that isn't yours. I could have exploded, made a scene, demanded an explanation in front of everyone, but I chose to leave. With my dignity intact and my heart in pieces. She didn't come after me. Not that night, not in the days that followed. Maybe she thought I would return, that the pain of losing her would be greater than her wounded pride. Maybe she thought it was just a crisis, that men like me endure, forgive, forget. But there was something different about me that time. It was the final straw. The last straw wasn't the kiss. It was the implicit contempt in her gaze, a gaze that pierced me as if I had ceased to exist. In the following weeks, she sank into the silence she chose for us. I, however, had to learn to be alone with the noises of what was left. It was strange to walk through the house and find her objects, her scent, her traces, while trying to erase the sound of her laughter flirting with another man just a few feet away. For years, I believed we knew what love was. That even with our stumbles, we remained side by side. But the truth is, at the exact moment I needed to feel chosen, I was discarded. And that changes everything. It deconstructs everything. It took me a while to sleep peacefully. I'd wake up in the middle of the night waiting for the sound of her keys in the door, waiting for a message, an excuse, a shred of regret. Nothing came. Nothing but smiling photos on social media, dinners, toasts. As if nothing had happened. As if the love we had was an illusion I'd invented myself. And it's cruel to realize that someone you prioritized never had you in mind. But life, as relentless as it is, also rebuilds. Little by little, with small steps, I filled the voids. One afternoon, I watched a sunset alone, and felt peace. One night, I slept and didn't dream of her. One day, I met someone. Not as someone seeking a replacement, but as someone finding shelter. It was different. Her gaze was firm, yet serene. She didn't want to heal my wounds, she just offered me a safe place to exist. This never made me feel like I needed to compete with the world. And maybe, just maybe, that was true love. And then, just when I'd lost all hope, she returned. Her eyes lowered, her face less radiant. Her body carried the artificial lightness of someone trying to pretend they've overcome, but in her soul, the weight of everything she'd lost. And she came with words. Words that sounded like regret, but came too late. She said she missed me, that she'd made a mistake, that she'd let herself be carried away by a stupid impulse. That she saw me leaving with her eyes, but didn't have the courage to stop me. She said she thought I'd come back. That she believed the kiss didn't mean that much. And in that moment, looking into the eyes of the one who broke me, I knew how much I'd grown. How much I'd freed myself from what had once held me captive. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted peace. And I offered her what I still had left, forgiveness. But I made it clear that the time for us was over. She cried. Not for the words she heard, but for the ones she could no longer hear. She cried for the future that would never exist. For the mornings we would never share again. And for the version of herself that was lost in that ballroom. But what she never knew, and perhaps never will, is that before the dance, before the kiss, before the fall, I wrote a letter. A letter in which I said I was ready to start over. That despite the problems, the disagreements, and the silences, I still believed in us. A letter with sincere promises, with plans, with love. A letter she never read. That was forgotten in a drawer, buried along with her last hope. Months later, she found that letter. Rummaging through the boxes of the past she tried to avoid, she found the envelope. He recognized my handwriting before he even opened it. And when he read it, he fell apart. Because there, in those lovingly written words, was everything she'd ever wanted, and everything she'd destroyed on a whim. She kept the letter. Not to return it to me, but to remind me every day that love is irreplaceable, that trust cannot be rebuilt with belated requests, that some gestures are too costly. And that sometimes, the price of a choice is spending the rest of your life wanting what you can no longer have. Because time doesn't forgive hesitations. And true love doesn't wait to be chosen last. But there's one detail even she doesn't know, one that could change everything you think about this story. Because the kiss at the prom, as cruel as it was, wasn't the beginning of the end, it was just the consequence of something that began much earlier. And this secret, buried beneath layers of pride, guilt, and silence, could reveal who really betrayed whom. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not romanticize and never support any type of betrayal. All the stories you hear are fictional, but they carry a profound truth: betrayal destroys, hurts, and leaves scars that time does not always heal. Our goal is to show, through emotion and drama, how much wrong choices can cost dearly, sometimes the love of your life. Now take a deep breath. Get ready to hear an intense, realistic, and shocking story. Because what comes next will mess with you. Her name was Emily. He was Daniel. And together they seemed to form the kind of couple people point to as a benchmark for partnership, balance, and serene love. They lived in a discreet, two-story house in a residential neighborhood where life passed in silence, interrupted only by the sound of neighbors mowing their lawns or the barking of dogs in the late afternoon. There was nothing extraordinary about that street, but there was something extraordinary between them, at least for a while. That's how they seemed to everyone, even to themselves. Their relationship had begun calmly, like a well-written book, the kind that doesn't begin with fireworks but captivates you with its honesty. He was a centered man, calmly spoken, observant, and kind to others, but reserved about his feelings. Emily, in turn, had a unique light that effortlessly enchanted. She was articulate, intelligent, and possessed a keen aesthetic sense that shone through both her dress and the way she decorated the rooms in her house. They were different, yes, but they fit together in what poets would call a complement. The beginning was like so many others: chance encounters, conversations that lasted into the wee hours, small discoveries that gradually built intimacy. Emily laughed easily, and Daniel had an almost magical ability to make her laugh even in the most awkward situations. She loved old music, he preferred silence, but he learned to enjoy watching her dance barefoot in the kitchen while making coffee. They shared Sunday mornings reading the newspaper, their feet intertwined on the sofa, discussing old movies and planning trips that often never happened, but were beautiful just to imagine. Emily worked in events. She was excellent at what she did, recognized, praised, surrounded by interesting people and environments that demanded a strong presence. She lived a life of parties, cocktail parties, meetings in trendy restaurants, and the opening of refined venues. Daniel was a systems analyst, methodical, disciplined, someone who found satisfaction in well-organized routines and peaceful weekends. Their professional lives ran on parallel tracks, sometimes distant, but they always converged at the end of the day, when the front door closed, and within that home, there was shelter, listening, and a kind of silent complicity. Over time, Emily's schedule began to intensify. More events, more responsibilities, more nights out. Daniel understood, or at least tried. He admired his wife's success, felt proud, but he also began to realize that their time together was becoming rare. Their once-long conversations began to be interrupted by text messages, rescheduled meetings, or unavoidable fatigue. There were no arguments, shouting, or accusations. Just a subtle emptiness, a kind of imperceptible distance that grew between them like a crack in glass, too small to cause alarm, but constant enough to signal that something wasn't quite right. Daniel was patient. Not the kind who ignores his own feelings, but the kind who believes that love is also about waiting, understanding, and choosing to stay even when it would be easier to leave. He listened attentively when she talked about her projects, asked clients' names, remembered important dates, and even when he felt left out, he tried not to show it. Emily, however, even with her commitments and the constant pressure to maintain a flawless image in her circle, made an effort to maintain their connection. She cooked dinner when she had a free night, wrote loving notes around the house, and brought small gifts, gestures that said, "I care," even if they sometimes felt more automatic than emotional. There was love, there was respect, but there was also silence. A silence no one dared to name. They looked at each other and, deep down, knew their relationship was changing. Not into something bad, but into something different. Emily was starting to shine brightly outside the house, and Daniel wondered, between emails, if he was still part of that glow. Sometimes he'd wait up just to see her walk in the door and hear about her night. Sometimes she'd arrive so exhausted she could barely take off her shoes before bed. They'd grown accustomed to her absence like someone growing accustomed to a leak. It's there, it bothers you, but you learn to ignore it. Close friends said they were a model couple. And in a way, they still were. They never failed to appear together at family parties. Photos on social media showed genuine smiles, trips taken, celebratory dinners. The images were true, but not complete. Because the best portraits aren't the ones that fit in a frame, but the ones that live in the eyes when no one is looking. And there, in their eyes, a longing for what they once were began to blossom. There was one particular night when everything could have been different. They were on the couch, the television off, their cell phones off. Just the two of them, the yellowish light from the lamp, and a thick silence between them. Daniel looked at Emily and wanted to say something, not a complaint, but a confession, an attempt to mend that bridge that was beginning to crumble. He wanted to say he missed her, that sometimes he felt invisible, that he was afraid he was becoming nothing more than emotional support, a safe haven she reached when she needed a break from real life. But he didn't. She, in turn, looked at him too. She wanted to tell him she was feeling lost, that the world outside consumed her, that sometimes she didn't even know what she wanted anymore, that she carried guilt for not being able to give him the time and attention he deserved. But she, too, remained silent. The moment passed, as all unlived moments do, and they simply leaned against each other, seeking comfort in the physical contact that replaced what words could no longer achieve. At that point, she started hanging out more with coworkers, whether for informal meetings or to strengthen ties with partners and suppliers. It wasn't uncommon for her to arrive late, send a message saying, "Don't wait for me, it's going to be longer than I thought," and only show up in the early hours. Daniel tried not to create any ghosts. He trusted her. He always had. And besides, there were no obvious signs of anything wrong. Emily was still affectionate, still making plans, still talking about the future with him, still referring to us. And that was enough, or at least that's what he tried to believe. As much as their rhythm had changed, a strong emotional memory still lingered between them. The scent of her perfume on her pillow, the sound of his laughter after a silly comment, the lazy Sundays they'd make pancakes together. It was these little things that held the structure together. And Daniel silently worked to keep them alive. Sometimes he'd buy her flowers just to see her smile. Other times, he'd leave a note taped to the bathroom mirror with simple phrases like, "Good luck today," or "I love you," even if sometimes silently. He knew love required presence, but he also knew absence was treacherous, and he feared it would swallow them both slowly, without warning. Emily, for her part, seemed to live in two worlds. At home, she was the loving, albeit absent, wife. Outside, she was the respected, elegant, and admired professional. Invitations to events multiplied, as did the interested glances. She sought nothing more than the usual validation given to those in a prominent position, but there was something in the way she began to behave that indicated a thirst for freedom, a desire to see herself beyond the relationship. Not for lack of love, perhaps, but for a desire to rediscover herself, or the version of herself she had set aside to live that marriage. The house remained organized, the photos remained on the shelves, the kisses remained on the door. But amidst all this, a silent tension grew, a feeling that something was shifting. That something very delicate was about to be lost. There was still no explicit pain, no screams, no secrets revealed. Just a kind of foreboding, that chill down our spine that we can't explain, but that prepares us, unknowingly, for what comes next. And at that exact point in history, everything could still be saved. They could still sit, talk, cry together, confess their fears, and rescue what was slipping away. There was still time. There was still love. But love, when neglected, doesn't die all at once. It fades slowly, like a candle that burns down to its last wick, without anyone realizing that darkness has already set in. They just didn't know that what was about to happen would forever change the way they looked at each other. And when the silence broke, there would be no going back. That night had a different feel, and it wasn't because of the venue or the elegant attire Daniel wore for the first time in months, at Emily's request. It was the kind of evening that felt rehearsed by someone who knew exactly where they wanted to go, with every detail carefully calculated. The room was packed with important guests, background musicians filled the room with a subtle melody, and waiters circulated with glasses of sparkling wine and sophisticated appetizers. Emily moved among the guests as if she'd always belonged there. Daniel, on the other hand, observed everything with the gaze of someone in a place to which he no longer felt connected. It wasn't jealousy. It was a distance. A kind of silent certainty that he was no longer part of the narrative she wrote every day away from home. But even so, he was there. Because part of him still insisted on believing that simply being by her side could mean something. And then it happened. Emily's boss approached with the ease of someone accustomed to entering places as if they owned them. He greeted Daniel with a quick, cool wave and turned to Emily with an exaggerated, overly confident smile. He extended his hand, inviting her to dance. There was no hesitation. She looked at Daniel, not with guilt or permission, but with a neutrality that cut through him like a blade. He nodded silently, a dry lump in his throat, and watched her walk away to the sound of a slow song. What followed was the kind of scene no one expected to experience. In the middle of the room, under the gaze of dozens of guests and co-workers, Emily's boss pulled her too close, holding her waist intimately, whispering something to which she responded with a disconcerted smile. And suddenly, he kissed her. It wasn't a stolen kiss, nor a forced one. It was a public gesture, rehearsed, premeditated. A gesture that, more than any words, shouted to the world that Daniel's place had been erased. The room erupted in applause and glasses. But inside him, everything stopped. Daniel didn't scream. He didn't make a scene. He simply walked toward the exit, his stomach churning, his vision blurry, his steps heavy, and his chest crushed by a pain he couldn't contain. He left the hall, left the party, left the wedding. It wasn't just the kiss. It was what the kiss represented. The break. The end. The realization that the love he cherished had been replaced by a public spectacle, as if his pain were irrelevant, invisible. In the days that followed, Emily didn't come home. She didn't call, text, or look for him. Daniel packed his bags and left the house with the same calm he'd entered it with years before, but now with his heart in tatters. Weeks passed. Emily finally sent a short, shallow message. Something along the lines of, "We need to talk." He didn't respond. She began to live a different life. She frequented the same places with the same people, but something about her had changed. That aura of conquest and glamour began to lose its luster. The boss she had danced with and dated became more distant, colder, less interested. She noticed that her messages were being responded to late, that the invitations began to dry up, that the sweet words had become empty formalities. What had initially seemed like an all-consuming passion began to reveal itself in its entirety, a power play, an ego experiment. Months passed. Emily returned to the house, which now seemed larger, emptier, quieter than ever before. The walls held memories she tried to ignore. The paintings, the objects, the smells. Everything there still spoke of him. But Daniel was no longer there. Not physically, not emotionally. The realization sank in slowly, cruelly. It wasn't about the kiss, it wasn't about her boss, it wasn't about freedom. It was about throwing away the only person who truly saw her, who waited up for her, who asked genuine questions about her day. It was about losing what you can't find twice. One day, rummaging through boxes stored in the back of her closet, among old papers and photographs, she found an envelope with her name handwritten on it. She immediately recognized Daniel's handwriting. For a moment, she hesitated. The envelope was sealed, tightly folded. She sat on the bedroom floor, the envelope in her hands, her heart racing. She took a deep breath and opened it. It was a letter. In it, Daniel had written about the love he still felt, about how much he wanted things between them to improve. He talked about the plans he had for the two of them, about a weekend he wanted to reserve just for the two of them, no distractions, no commitments, just them. He talked about how he still believed in new beginnings, even with the failures, even with the distance that had grown between them. It was a letter written days before the prom. A letter full of hope, vulnerability, and surrender. A letter she never read because she never bothered to look for it. And in that moment, alone, sitting on the floor of a room that no longer held her, Emily broke down. The tears came like a belated breakup, like an apology that had nowhere else to go. Because there was proof that Daniel still loved her, still wanted her, still believed in her, before she destroyed him. That letter wasn't just a message. It was the representation of the last gesture of love she'd ignored. That's when she understood everything. He understood that betrayal isn't just a physical act. It's the choice to ignore the other person when they're still struggling. It's the cowardice of letting someone break inside while you pretend everything's okay. Emily tried to reach out to Daniel. She tried to justify, explain, reconnect. He received her calmly. Kindly, even. He listened to everything she had to say. Her tears, her apologies, her memories recounted with the urgency of someone trying to erase the past. And when she asked if there was still a chance, he didn't yell, didn't point a finger, didn't return the pain. He simply said, "The time for us is over. You threw away the part of me that still believed." It was at that moment that she realized the magnitude of her loss. Because Daniel had moved on. Not with anger, but with maturity. He had found someone who looked at him tenderly, who listened attentively, who held his hand lightly. And nothing Emily could say could bring back the man she had killed in the silence of his absence. Their story didn't end with screams or scandals. It ended with a letter that was never read in time, with a love that died waiting to be noticed. And with a woman alone, surrounded by memories, trying to pick up the pieces of what she herself broke with her own hands. Life went on, because it always does, even when the soul wants to stop in time. Emily began to live with absence as her only faithful companion. She tried to return to her former self, seeking out old haunts, mutual friends, the spaces that had once been part of her routine alongside Daniel, but discovered she had become a stranger within her own history. The doors that once opened with smiles now remained closed in polite silence. The gazes that used to admire her seemed to avoid her. She was no longer seen as a role model, as an example, as the strong and sophisticated woman everyone applauded. She was simply someone who stumbled over her own vanity and let slip something that could not be regained. She tried to find an escape from the hole growing inside her through work, but even the glow of her career seemed to grow dull. Her presence no longer aroused the same fascination, and her own boss, the one who had made her cross the line between respect and ego, treated her with disconcerting indifference, as if what had happened between them had been just another disposable chapter in his long list of conquests. The emptiness that had once been subtle now became a heaviness. Emily began having trouble sleeping. Some nights, she woke suffocating, as if her own body were reminding her of everything she had lost. It wasn't regret for what she felt, but for what she had ignored. She began to mentally revisit the moments of affection Daniel had offered her without expecting anything in return. The way he'd wait for her in the early hours of the morning without complaining, how he'd hold her hands even when she was far away, how he'd leave notes around the house with simple words that now took on the weight of poems. She remembered the letter she'd found too late and began reading it every morning, like a ritual of grief and atonement. He tried to write a reply, but no words seemed enough. In her head, she imagined every scenario in which she could go back in time and not go dancing, or at least look back before crossing the line. But time is cruelly linear. And she knew it. That us that once inhabited her days was dead. And she was solely responsible for the funeral. Meanwhile, Daniel walked steadily, but not in a hurry. His process of reconstruction was neither immediate nor easy. It wasn't a leap, but one step at a time, respecting the pain, acknowledging the scars, learning to listen to himself. The first few months were hard, lonely, marked by insomnia and memories that insisted on visiting him at the quietest times. But he allowed himself to go through it all. He didn't deny the pain, he didn't run from it, he simply faced it. Over time, he began to discover small pleasures that had previously been dormant. He returned to reading the books he had set aside, reconnected with old friends, rediscovered music, a love of cooking, and even the pleasure of walking aimlessly on Saturday mornings. It was during this process of silent healing that he met someone new, a woman with a calm presence, a steady gaze, and an easy smile. She didn't come to erase the past, but to help him illuminate the future. With her, Daniel didn't have to prove anything, nor hide, nor carry the weight of a mistake he didn't make. He was simply accepted. And as simple as that may seem, for someone who has been broken, being accepted becomes a miracle. They built a new daily routine together, unhurriedly, without pressure. They didn't talk much about the past, because they understood that old pains needed to be respected, but the present was so light that, little by little, the weight of what was left behind became just part of the story, not the center of it. Daniel learned to smile again, but this time, fully. No longer as if disguising wounds, but as if healing had been found. Emily learned about the new relationship. Not through social media, nor through gossip, but because one day she saw him from afar, crossing the street with his new partner by his side, hand in hand, laughing at something she could no longer reach. There was no confrontation, no exchange of glances. Just a silence that spoke volumes. That moment wasn't the final point, but the definitive confirmation that he was gone. And she, finally, was left behind. Years passed. Emily continued living, but she was never the same. She rebuilt part of her life, kept her career afloat, met other people, but no connection seemed to last. No gesture of affection felt genuine. Because deep down, she compared everyone to Daniel. And everyone lost. One night, alone at home, rummaging through her drawers, she found the letter again. It was yellowed, carefully folded. She read it aloud, word for word, with the same pain as the first time. When she finished, she hugged the paper to her chest and cried like she hadn't cried in a long time. Not for him, but for herself. For what she destroyed. For what she threw away. For the woman she was and the woman she could have been, if she had chosen to love instead of flaunt. Time passed, but she remained with that unfinished version of herself. She never rebuilt, and thus. She never found another perspective that saw her the way Daniel did. And that, more than any punishment, was the true weight of her choice. She wasn't abandoned. She was left at the exact moment she decided to leave her own story. Daniel, however, eventually remarried. Not in grand ceremonies, but on a simple, beautiful afternoon, surrounded by people who knew his journey and understood the value of that new beginning. His new partner, with whom he built a true home, never tried to compete with ghosts. She was simply present, and that was more than enough. Daniel moved on with ease, but with wisdom. He knew what he lost, he knew what he endured, but he also knew that true love is not measured by time, but by reciprocity. And now he had it. Not perfect love, but true love. If you've made it this far, tell us in the comments what you thought of this story and how it touched you. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, intense, real, and full of lessons. This narrative was merely fiction, but its impact is profoundly true. Because betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships, it destroys trust, love, memory, and hope. It leaves scars on those who truly loved, and emptiness in those who chose to betray. The loss of sincere love through a selfish decision isn't just a mistake, it's a sentence. Here on the channel, we do not support any form of betrayal. Our purpose is to show, through stories like this, that choices have consequences. And that not all love, no matter how strong, survives disrespect. Always choose love. But above all, choose respect.